Okay, welcome back. This is part three. Salim requested, he donated to this for this video. The 100 Years War on Palestine with journalist Chris Hedges and President Hamza. That guy. By the way, this lady, I think it's a lady, has not said a word yet. Just so we're clear.
Keep people trapped in an open-air prison or a concentration camp for 16 years and humiliate them and impoverish them and shoot them as if they were beasts and not expect this kind of response.
Well, I think also one of the things that Dr. Khadidi points out is that, Hamas, who had used, obviously, these against civilians, which is a war crime, whether it comes from the Israelis or from the Arabs, to attack civilians is a war crime in Islam as well as in just international law. But one of the things that he points out is that when they were elected in 2006, they were actually surprised that they won, but they toned down a lot of their rhetoric and basically were willing to kind of enter into, in a similar fashion, the way, Michael Collins, and it's interesting that the Zionists and I think a lot of the Arab resistance both saw the Irish rebellion as in fact, Yitzhak Shamir, he actually used Michael as his code name after Michael Collins. So the Zionists saw the RIA as a kind of, a model when they were using terrorist tactics against the British. But what was interesting was they did not allow Hamas to have any participation in a political process. That immediately they got the PLO to attempt to take over the place, and that you have that civil war. I don't know if you were around. Were you in Gaza at any time during that period?
I was in Gaza when Arafat came back.
That was 2001.
And what Israel wanted was a colonial police force,
right?
Which of course they get under Abbas.
Yeah,
that's why he has no support. And those were, by every account, free elections, 2006. And then not only did they set up the siege, but they also tried to carry out a failed coup d'etat to overthrow it. And I think we should note that from its inception, going all the way back, there have been negotiations with Egyptian intermediaries between the Israeli leadership and Hamas. And I would also say that when you look closely at the violations of the ceasefires that have been in place, it's almost always Israel that's violated them because they're looking for a provocation that gives them an ability to quote unquote mow the lawn, to carry out egregious bombing campaigns that leave thousands of Palestinian civilians dead or wounded.
Well, one of the arguments that's been made is like, this is what they voted for. Whereas the elections, which were in 2005, there hasn't been elections since. They only got 44% of the actual vote in Gaza. And largely it was due to the fact that people were so frustrated with the corruption that they were seeing in the PA. And so almost, I think over half of this population wasn't even alive when that election took place. Right. And I think I'd like to hear also from Fadwa about her own experience in the Intifada, because the levels of frustration and the attempts at using peaceful, because there have been, as there have been serious nonviolent attempts at addressing this issue, and they've really been brutally. That guy Bassem Tamimi, I think, I think he's in Hebron, Khalil, and he was like totally nonviolent, like didn't even believe in violence, and he was considered, an agitator, and the fact that it's like 400,000 or more have been arrested. If we think of those numbers, 400,000. I mean, that out of the, you know, the 4 million people, huge number of people that have experienced incarceration, interrogation, and a lot of it without habeas corpus, without, you know, I mean, it's pretty shocking. And then the children also, the fact that there's been so many of these children. So, but you know,
going back to something he said, I was wanting him to end his point when he said a lot of the people today weren't alive when the elections in 2005 happened, when Hamas was voted in. Excuse me. I'm eating, side note, for anybody who cares, Munster cheese. It's like combination of mozzarella and Colby. Oh, it's so good. Apologize. So, when he was saying that, you know, about the voting in, and a lot of the people, a lot of the kids today had nothing to do with it. On a counter, I understand what he's saying. Being a white guy in America, spoiler, I am looked at as being guilty of slavery. Slavery was ended in 1865. That's a 1865. It is 2023 now. And I was born in 1979. 2000. So I am held guilty of something not only I had nothing to do with, wasn't around. You could go on a limb and say it ended 114 years before I was even born, and yet I am just as guilty as George Washington. And that amazes me, that there are people in this country that are so goddamn stupid that could believe that I am as responsible as those who did it. 114 years. What the average generation, what do they go by? Generations are like 25 years. So we'll say almost 5 generations have passed, and yet I'm guilty. I've never owned a slave. I own 2 dogs, but they're not slaves. My family history didn't own any. So I understand what he's saying when people today are blamed for an election that happened 18 years ago and they had nothing to do with it. I get it. Although 18 years is vastly different from the 100 and whatever, it'd be 35, 158 years ago. And I'm told that I'm guilty. And what's funny is I'm told I'm guilty by other white people. It's like, no, I'm not, and you're stupid. And I hope you get testicle cancer, even though you don't have testicles. And I'm referring to one person in particular. So anyways, yeah, I get it. It's a very annoying thing.
Can you talk a little bit about maybe just about your own experience during the Intifada, what you saw?
Sure. So I was born in San Francisco, but my family moved to Palestine in 1986. I was 10, and I was a student at the Friends Quaker School in Ramallah, but living in Beit Hanina. So when the First Intifada started, the checkpoints were set up between the West Bank and Jerusalem. We'd have to cross into Ramallah to go to school. And was interesting for us as children. We experienced our schools getting tear gassed, shot at. We saw, soldiers in the streets in Ramallah shooting at, once if they shut down schools and checkpoints, we had to figure out a way to get past checkpoints to get back home. And, I was 11, grew up in the Bay Area. And this is something that we had to figure out how to do with our schoolmates, a lot of them a lot younger than us. But I think what was most impactful for us was picking up tear gas canisters in our village, turning them around and seeing made in the USA. And what that meant for us as, having been born in the United States and now living in our homeland of Palestine, it sort of sets up this, what does it really mean? What does it mean for us? Witnessing our schools were completely shut down by the springtime, and realizing that education was being used as a weapon. Like, we were denied schooling as children because there's power in knowledge, and understanding that even though—
I just want to pause it real fast. When she said picking up tear gas canisters, it said made in the USA. Okay. I mean, we do sell to Israel. But is she saying then that I'm at fault? Because she was born in San Francisco. So if I'm at fault, she's just as guilty. So did anyone get mad at her? Or she gets a pass because she was there? I mean, to me, if I'm guilty, she's guilty. That Chris Hedges is guilty. My phone's guilty. But I'm just saying, if we're going to pass around guilt, it doesn't come to just because you're no longer there. You were born there, so that means you're guilty too. So are people getting mad at her? I mean, I hope so, if people are getting mad at me.
So we didn't have schools, we still needed to figure out a way to study and learn. So just as a young child being exposed to occupation, being exposed to soldiers, visiting in the summers, seeing settlers with AK-47s on their shoulders, as just walking in the streets, and what that meant for us. I was also there.
Okay, AK-47s aren't American, so are you mad at Russians now? I'm not trying to get on her, but what I'm saying is that if you're going to hold one person accountable, then Russia now is held accountable because their weapons were there. If there was a Chinese mine in the harbor, is China like? I just feel like I'm getting blamed, so I'm passing around blame. Just saying.
There in the second Intifada, actually happened to be visiting my grandparents. We got stopped at a checkpoint, and we were about a mile from home, and we had U.S. passports. We don't have Palestinian residency. We don't have Hawiyas or anything like that. So showing and saying, we're U.S. citizens, we need to be able to cross back, and saying that your passport means nothing in this country. Your U.S. once you enter this country, your passport means nothing here because you're a Palestinian. And never really being understood here, people not being familiar with the Palestinian situation, the story, the country, and trying to teach people when we were living here about being Palestinian, what it meant to be Palestinian, what it meant to be under occupation. Just in my own high school experience, sharing like the daily life of a Palestinian in a class, and getting a 3-day suspension for expressing the daily life of Palestinian children, getting arrested and shot at. And my parents were never asked about it. I was never questioned about it. It was just automatically assumed that I had done something wrong, and having to advocate for myself and being strong enough to do that. So I think part of being Palestinian, whether it's inside the United States or living in Palestine, is that you have to be able to advocate for yourself, and you have to have a voice to tell people your story, because mainstream media, government, educational institutions are not doing that job. They're not expressing any truth in terms of what we experience. So that's our lived experience. I think especially in this latest assault on Gaza, you know, a lot of people are learning about what's happening in Palestine, and they're surprised. Wait a second, they just released a 15-year-old who was in jail for 8 years. So why was he arrested in the first place? Oh, you know, we know children are arrested. We know that children are held without charge and without any day in court. But it's new to a lot of people. So having to just tell our story, I think it's comforting now that people are starting to listen. I've attended. You know, my father came here, protested the Vietnam War when he came in the 60s. As a college student, I was protesting the wars that Iraq and the other wars that were happening around the time I was in college, and now attending protests with my own children about what's happening in Palestine, and just seeing how the crowd has changed for me, even in the Bay Area over the last few weeks, seeing the crowds double and quadruple, and looking around and seeing a lot of diversity, a lot of American Jews joining the protests, I think has been really comforting, because I've always felt that on our part as Palestinians, existence is resistance. So we continue to keep our traditions, teach our children history, hold on to our culture, our way of life, what's, olive oil and picking tree from our trees and things like that. But for the public, it's for me been about getting Americans, and especially the American Jewish community, to voice their opposition to what Israel is doing and what the Zionist plan is. It has to come from within. I really feel like that, because like you said, historically we've been a silenced group. We don't have advocates. Even within our own people, our own government hasn't really been together enough to really advocate effectively on behalf of the Palestinian people. We don't have a structured form of resistance. We don't have armies. So we can continue to exist as Palestinians and have families and hope that they survive. But it's really on other communities to give us, to be self-reflective and recognize the wrong that's being committed against our people. And I think that's what I'm seeing now. I think that's finally happening. I think that's something that you've also mentioned. Just being able to have, Palestine Zaytuna have this type of event where our history is being told and shared, and it's really comforting. It's something welcomed. It's something I appreciate, and I'm thankful for. But I know that you've been doing this work in journalism for a long time, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that about you. I have a lot of family members who are big fans of the work that you do and appreciate your efforts as well. So I wish you were here so I can properly thank you for the work that you do. But yeah, it's interesting. We've always heard stories from my grandfather always told us that when he was living in Palestine, they were neighbors with Jewish families. They traded, they worked together, they ate the same fruits and vegetables from the vendors, and things changed. During the 1967 war, he had to take 10 children, his wife and sister, and walk to a safe place where they weren't going to be bombed. And I look now at images of what families are having to do, carrying their children, carrying their whatever belongings they can manage to hold on to, and leave their homes. It's very overwhelming when you hear things like dozens of family members passing, and you try to explain that to the American public who don't have. I have 24 cousins on my father's side, and I know them all very well, and they have their children. I know my family very well. Not to have that perspective, not to have that. So imagine sometimes I tell people, imagine the whole school was bombed, or your whole neighborhood. You may not know your family, but at least you're.
One side of my family, my dad's side, I have 6 cousins, and they're all male. 6 cousins on one side, all male. On my dad's side. Then on my mom's side, I have maybe 18 to 20. Probably talk to I mean, if I see them, I'd talk to four. I said in the last video, after my Nana passed, after she passed, family split. She was the glue that kind of held everything together. She had Christmas parties, and we'd all go there and have a Christmas party. She was the glue that kept everything together, and when she passed, a lot of infighting, and you know, I'm team my mom, so people who gave my mom shit, I don't want anything to do with. I'm nice to them now, but I really don't want to be. But I don't go out of my way to talk to them. Don't want to be involved at functions with them. Don't even want to look at them. But you know, that's our side of the family. That's love.
Imagine that just nobody's there anymore.
Yeah. And
It's
they often live together.
Yeah.
You know, one of the really beautiful traditions that they had before all of this madness was that if they had children on the same day, if people of the Hara or the Hayy, they would actually make them brothers or sisters, and that was irrespective of the religion.
You know, when you take down one building, it's the grandfather, all of his sons, all of likely his daughters, the grandchildren, and the great-grandchildren in one shot. And what that does to people who value family so much, it's such an important part of who we are. But I'll say, you know, I will say that in terms of hope and I know you said like the curse of being Palestinian, but really we believe in God. And I think that's what carries a lot of Palestinians. We believe that what comes is from God, and it's our duty to be patient and understand that ultimately there will be accountability and there will be relief. So, you know, when I hear like Palestinian mothers in Gaza say that their children are asking them if it hurts when they get bombed.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I have 3 children, and I just think like, you don't want anything to happen to your child.
Yeah, that's another really horrific trope, this idea that, you know, it's a death cult and these people don't care about their children. You know, at the pain that you see, and often these kind of performative displays, which are really attempts to mask something because they want to show the strength and fortitude, but this idea that they don't suffer, you know, that they want death. I mean, Hamas told them to stay, and you could clearly see everybody was leaving, you know, so I think they want to live. It's just a lie to say that these people somehow have this death wish. They want to, I mean, you wrote that letter, which I hope everybody listens to. It was beautifully read by Eunice Wong, but you wrote that letter. You know, maybe talk a little bit what inspired you to write that letter about, you know, it was a letter to the children of Gaza.
Yeah, Letter to the Children of Gaza, which my wife, who's an actor, read. You can find it at chrishedges.substack.com. There's no paywall, so you can get it. Well, I was flying. I was going to go to Rafah. The Egyptians didn't let me get in, but I spent so much of my life in Palestine and carry all of the, you know, heartache and emotions that, you both have. And I didn't want to do nothing. So I sat up all night on the plane and listened to it, because she brings out the emotional power of it. It's only 7 minutes long. But yes, of course, that's true. And, go back to the Vietnam War, and they would make the same kinds of callous comments about Vietnamese, that they don't love their children the way that we do. They don't. It's a death cult. I mean, this is standard practice for all settler colonial projects, because when you seek to suppress an indigenous population as brutally as Israel has, and we could argue that this may turn out to be even worse than the Nakba in terms of numbers. 750,000 Palestinians were ethnically cleansed. 1947, 1948, several dozen massacres, Deir Yassin and other places. But, in terms of scale, and I know Bibi Netanyahu, I know some of the figures in this government. I think we have to take their rhetoric very seriously. And, the one point we didn't make is that Gaza is a very tiny place. It's only 20 miles long and 5 miles wide. I was in Sarajevo during the war, and we were hit with 300 to 400 shells a day, along with constant sniper fire. So that was about 3 to 4 dead a day, 24 wounded a day. And I don't want to minimize that. I still have nightmares about it. But you have to juxtapose that with Gaza, where upwards of 100, sometimes 160 children a day are being murdered. And they don't really know the numbers, because, of course, so many people are missing, trapped under the rubble. But it gives you a sense of the savagery, the scale, and you would have to go back to, I don't know, Chechnya, maybe Mariupol, maybe Stalingrad. I mean, we're talking about a level of bombardment that is certainly unlike anything we've seen in this century. And they're civilian. I mean, you could probably make a pretty good case that Israel's killed more UN workers than they've killed members of Hamas.
I'm going to end that there. I don't have a lot to say. And I wasn't jumping on her earlier. I'm just pointing out that if she was blaming America for the tear gas canisters, well, take some blame then. Because I don't feel like I should be the one who takes blame for it. But I will. There'll be people who blame me. Your government. Okay, yeah, okay. Okay. I'm going to end this one here. There's a thanks button. You can donate to the channel. You can request videos. You can request videos without donating. It just takes longer. I'm going to keep doing the head movement until the video is over. Subscribe to the channel. There's a bell button. Click on that, because it helps somehow. Words. Thumbs up. Click that. If you want to click the thumbs down, I got this fresh grenade I want you to eat. Tastes good too, especially when it goes kablooey in your face. And have a good day.